suggested or requested I go through this and kind of introduce myself to you. So he says, first of all, when you're a little guy, a little kid, what was going on? People know you today for you work in business and construction and soil biology, but it says, where does your story really start? Who was little boy Timmy before all of that? Well, I grew up with a pretty cool set of parents. My dad was a designer. My mom was a biology teacher in college, and she was always bringing home worms and frogs and petri dishes and calves' brains and all of that. My dad brought home fabric, and so before that, I was just a normal little kid. I had two older brothers. Loved being outdoors. Spent most of my time outdoors or building. All right, next question here says, I heard a story that when you were about 5 years old, you took your mother's sewing machine apart. Yeah, I did that. Yeah. Along with being a biology teacher, my mother was actually a beautiful seamstress. She made a lot of her own dresses, almost all of her special occasion dresses. She made those, and she did the most beautiful handwork and finished work inside and out. But she taught us how to sew. Taught me how to sew when I was about 4 years old. And I remember watching her put the button holder. She had an old Singer. It had a standalone device. It was the buttonhole device. And I watched her take the boot off that sewing machine and put that buttonhole on there and watch her make the buttonholes. And then I spent the next couple of days just making buttonholes on scrap pieces of fabric. I was fascinated by it. But then I saw her cleaning something. She took the cover off of it. I watched her cleaning some of the gears. Then I saw the gears for the first time. And I was just amazed at how fine they were and how well they fit together. I don't know. She was gone. I was home. I took that thing apart and I took the gears out of it. I wanted to see how it worked. It was a fascinating machine. Whoever invented that sewing machine, man, was a bright guy. I went on to really be in love with machines that made stuff for the rest of my life. But yeah, I took my mom's sewing machine apart. It's something what readers asked me about the mini bike story. Oh my God, there were so many mini bike stories. I remember the first ones we had were a little rigid frame Tecumseh 3 horsepower banana seat or shitty little seat. But man, it was awesome. It gave us freedom. I think we started riding when I was about 5 or 6. And then I got a Honda. I took that Tecumseh apart, had the carburetor off. I didn't ever take the engine apart. But I took everything else apart. Just took it apart, just to take it apart and put it back together. Then I got a Honda 50, 3-speed automatic, and I took that apart too. It was a much more complicated machine, which fascinated me. But I learned how to, some little plate inside the carburetor throw thing that really restricted it. I think it was there by design. And I figured that out by accident. I took that plate out. That was a lot of fun. I wish I knew where that thing was, but I really don't remember what stuff. Lost track of a bunch of vehicles and mini bikes and boats. Yeah, so I don't know what I was trying to discover on that. I was just curious. Probably, number one, I wanted to make it louder and faster, which I managed to do. So it says something here. I'm trying to see. Most people see information, whereas it says here, you seem to see connections. When did you realize that your brain worked differently? I don't really have some eureka moment, but I just remember forever, my entire life. I'd see people doing things and see things that had been done, and I just questioned it all the time. But more than anything, I just started to realize that everything is connected. Way before I got in, we were into biology, but I didn't even realize it. My mom kind of tripped. But today, and for a long time, when I see something going on, see it, my first thing is I almost immediately see 2 or 3 things that are associated with it or impacted by it. And as I've gone on and I kind of try to train myself to do that. But now it's almost like a burden. I can't even hardly enjoy going out to the desert, just thinking about how the rocks got there. The trees that are on top of the rocks, how they got there. It says, okay, this next one, because they heard a story about a crane, and I've used this crane kind of as a metaphor for a lot of stuff. And the stuff was, sometimes a 5-minute delay can cost you 5 weeks on a project. And people look at me like I'm a ghost when I say that, but it's true. I was at a job one time. I used to do a bunch of industrial construction, and it was a busy site, not very big. So every space was important, and we had this crane coming in to make this big lift. And the guys were supposed to get some stuff out of the way and into the way and over here and moved around to get the yard sorted out. At the time, I was not in charge of the yard. But then they were supposed to put a gravel pad down to hold this crane up. Well, they didn't get it done. And crane showed up just when he was supposed to, 7 o'clock in the morning. And he sat there farting around all day, couldn't do anything, but he was charging the job. And pretty soon, his clock was running short, and he had to get back on the road and get back to the yard. He was not scheduled for overnight. And the guys trying to get the stuff ready for the crane, they were screaming, oh, we only need 5 more minutes. And the crane guy's like, man, I got to go. And he took off. He went back. And of course, the project manager at the time was on the phone screaming bloody murder back to the crane company. Hey, we got to have him back here tomorrow. And the answer was, he can't come back for 5 weeks. He's booked up solid. You guys had him all day. You weren't ready. You're going to have to wait. And they waited 5 weeks to get another crane in there. So when I say sometimes a 5-minute delay costs you 5 weeks, I mean it, because it is true. But the main lesson on that I think is that all of these things are connected. So if you have a delay back where they're making soft drinks, that can ultimately impact the dinner service. I mean, they seem kind of unrelated, but maybe that's not, maybe it is related. But everything is connected. One thing goes a little akilt, and it does have a ripple effect. Whether you recognize the ripples or not, it does. Here's a question from a reader. We were talking about this the other night, about this bracket. And this fits right into the 5 minutes, 5 weeks thing. I just got made the manager of production at a facility that made big compressors. They made them on a platform, a big steel platform, transport and then offload and bolt down to the ground for the final product. But we were making the platforms. And we would have, when I took it over, the place was in shambles. They were 14, 15, 16 months behind schedule. Had a bunch of customers screaming bloody murder. And so I had just got dropped in to turn this thing around. So when I go to a place like that, second thing I do is I just walk around, see what I see, ask questions. And ultimately, curiosity is the driver for all this. But anyway, I walked by this one skid. This guy was sitting there with a cutting torch and a grinder, and he was fiddling around and a hand drill. And I didn't say much about it when I walked by my first time, but 2 or 3 hours later, I walked back by it again, and this guy was still sitting over there fiddling with this thing. So I asked him, hey, what are you doing? I'm building this bracket. Bracket for what? Bracket for this certain kind of valve we use. Really? How long does it take you to do that? I don't know, 3, 4, 5 hours. 3, 4, 5 hours, shit. So then I asked him some other questions. I said, what's that valve do? Well, where does it have to go? How does it have to be mounted? And it turns out every single one of these projects had this valve on there. So he got done building that valve, or that bracket, and then the day was over, kind of thing. He spent all the day working on it. So I picked that bracket up and I took it over to this guy who I'd become buddies with real quick. He was the head welder at this place. There was a lot of welding going on, but he was the head welder. And I took it to him behind the curtain, and I said, hey, Todd, look at this thing. What do you think about it? What is it? He had never seen it before. Nobody in this company had ever bothered to take this bracket over to Todd. So I told him what it was. I said, how would you build this thing? Well, I would do this and this and this. And so why don't you make me one of them? Matter of fact, maybe 2 of them. So he did. And because I knew I needed 2 of them, because I had to give one of them back to the knucklehead who spent 5 hours fiddling with it. So he made them, and went back, took it to this guy. And what we figured out is this thing could be made in one way. Because before that, every one of them had been made differently, just by whoever was standing there, his turn to make the bracket. That's cutting torch, grinders, welders. They had no business out there doing that. Anyway, took it back to him. Then I didn't show the boss at that point, because they were a little hesitant to make any change. We don't do it that way around here. Took it to the warehouse guy. I said, hey, I want to get a part number for this bracket here. I want to start putting them in stock. Well, we can't get part number. Well, how do you get a part number? Well, you got to go to engineering to get a part number. I took the bracket, went over to engineering, sat down with the head engineer. I said, hey, told him the story about the bracket. I said, I would like to put a part number on this bracket here. I want to put them in stock. So then all you got to do is reference a part number on the drawings from that Ford. He did that. He kind of kicked and screamed, but he did it. So then I had to go to purchasing. So then I went back with the part number to inventory. He goes, well, we can't do it without a purchasing thing. I went to purchasing. It was the biggest bunch of fucking around I'd ever seen in my life. But it turns out we could make that bracket in about 15 minutes if we made 20 of them at a time. Just set up a gig or jig, chopped all the parts up, laid them out in a jig, boop, 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 stitched them together, sent them over to paint, painted them, put them on the shelf with the part number. So from 5 hours to 15 minutes. And at that time, these platforms were rolling through the floor. I mean, it was our intent that we didn't necessarily move them down the road like an assembly line, but we expected them, they'd certainly move from one spot to another out to the test pad, and they had to move so that we could keep feeding projects into the thing. Well, it didn't take very long to figure out that if this guy spends 5 hours just working on this bracket, and that just throws a huge traffic jam into the whole system. And they were doing that all up and down the deal. So when I saw that bracket, and I figured out in about 3 minutes that this is a bunch of monkey business, I got it squared away. Later on, I took all that process of thought through a bunch of other parts, had them turned into sub-assemblies. Some of them, like our computer controllers, I would have them built offline, and really assembled so we could just drop them on. So when I got there, it was taking them about 14 months to build a big one, or it was taking me 14 days to get one out of the door. Sometimes we get 2 or 3 out at the same time, because I ended up with about 7 different distinct production lines that were orderly. But it all started with that bracket. I thought that was kind of cool. And somebody asked me about a conversation the other night that said I was fascinated with connections. And I absolutely am fascinated. I believe that, well, I don't know if it's a burden or a gift, but I see connections pretty quickly. And I see them layers down the pipe. Whether it's that bracket causing a compounded 5-hour delay. I mean, if 5 minutes could cost you 5 weeks, think about what 5 hours can cost you, especially when you got inventory piling up in the back and you can't get it. So I am fascinated about connections, and I see them in a lot of different layers, whether it's personal, mechanical, global, internet. I do see connections. And, sometimes it's hard to explain them. So it says here, if somebody were to spend an hour with me, they asked me this last night, having coffee with me, what would I hope they walked away thinking? And my hope is that they would walk away thinking about something that they could be curious about. And if they're curious enough and they stop and look long enough, they'll start to see the connections. I see this in a whole bunch of ways. I mean, microorganisms, infrastructure, roads, bridges, airplanes, gasoline, pipelines, they're all connected. So I would hope that somebody would walk away being curious about something that they have kind of glossed over or didn't think that they had the ability to think about. And that's what I like to do, is just promote, see them.